From Washington, this is VOA News. Snipers fire at UN inspectors in Syria. The trial of fallen Chinese politician Bo Xilai comes to an end. I'm Dave Deforrest reporting from Washington. The United Nations says unidentified snipers have shot at one of the vehicles carrying UN chemical weapons inspectors in the Syrian capital. The UN team is trying to investigate a suspected major chemical weapons attack that took place last week in the Damascus suburb of Ghouta. Rebels and activists say government forces used chemical weapons that killed hundreds of people. The government denies the allegations and is accusing the rebels of using such weapons. The spokesman for Secretary General Ban Ki-moon said the UN team's vehicle was shot at multiple times, rendering it no longer serviceable. The inspectors returned to a government checkpoint, but plan to continue their work with a new vehicle. For more on this story, visit our website, voanews.com. Israeli soldiers have killed 3 Palestinians during a battle at a refugee camp in the West Bank. An Israeli police spokesman says officers were attempting to arrest a suspect in the area when hundreds of Palestinians attacked them with rocks and firebombs. The officers then tried to disperse the crowd. Sectarian violence struck Iraq Sunday with car bombings and shootings, leaving at least 46 people dead and more than 100 wounded. No one has claimed responsibility for Sunday's attacks. Tensions between Sunnis and Shiites has been simmering since police cracked down on Sunni protesters in April. The corruption trial of ousted Communist Politburo official Bo Xilai has ended after 5 days of hearings. The Intermediate People's Court in the eastern city of Jinan announced today that a verdict will be pronounced at a date to be decided. Bo is accused of bribe-taking, embezzlement, and abuse of power. Afghan President Hamid Karzai has arrived in Pakistan. He's on a mission to get that nation's help in establishing direct talks between the Kabul government and Taliban insurgents. The 2-day visit will be the Afghan leader's first direct contact with Pakistan Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif since Sharif took office in June. Across the Philippines today, National Heroes Day, tens of thousands of people turned out to demonstrate against discretionary funds given to lawmakers that critics say are funneled to corrupt organizations. Simone Orendine reports.
On this national holiday, throngs of protesters turned out in the heart of the capital, screaming that stolen riches be returned to the people. The funds dispersed by the executive branch for legislators are supposed to be earmarked for development projects across the country. But in the spring, investigators found a handful of senators had instead put the funds into bogus non-government agencies. News of the investigation sparked public outcry, which culminated in Monday's multiple protests. Simone Orendine for VOA News, Manila.
Renewed fighting in the Democratic Republic of Congo between government soldiers and M23 rebels has brought expressions of concern from the United States. The two sides suffered heavy casualties Sunday north of the city Goma. The fighting that began last week marks the first major hostilities since the Army bombed M23 headquarters in July and drove the rebels several kilometers from Goma. Colombia's President Juan Manuel Santos says he has instructed government negotiators to return to Cuba to continue peace talks with Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, or FARC, Latin America's last major rebel army. A wildfire in northern California has swallowed up the western edge of the Yosemite National Park. It's also threatening the city of San Francisco's water and power supplies. Russian opposition leader and Moscow mayoral candidate Alexei Navalny has been detained briefly during a campaign rally. He's a fierce critic of the president, Vladimir Putin, and an anti-corruption campaigner. He was detained on Sunday. The environmentalist group Greenpeace says Russian authorities boarded a ship it owns in the Kara Sea. The ship was taking part in a protest against Arctic oil drilling. Greenpeace said today the Russian Coast Guard boarded the Arctic Surprise without permission after the environmentalist group launched inflatable boats with banners reading "Save the Arctic." I'm Dave Deforrest. More news at voanews.com.